Hi, my name is Bill Schaeffer, and I have another book review. Today's book, the Book of Enoch. About 15 years ago, I had a dream. And in this dream, Enoch appeared to me, and I woke up with the memory of the letters inscribed in a wall. E-N-O-C-H. Like they were carved Roman numerals in an Egyptian wall. Now I had no idea what the word Enoch meant, but I thought it was a name from the Bible. So I looked and I found it in Genesis. And I told my mother, who's a big fan of the Bible, and she looked and she go, "Oh, I found it too." And it was only later that I found out that she found it in Jude. So this was interesting, and the memory of that dream really stuck with me for some reason. And I became a little bit interested in the story of the Bible and the history of Christian theology and the history of the Christian church. And I started doing a little research. Well, later on, I was astounded to find out that there is a Book of Enoch. And this is the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch has a very interesting story. Scholars think it was written about 200 BC in Israel. By the time of Jesus, around 0 AD, this book was very popular and widely distributed. And most people were familiar with it. Now at that time, and we forget today, at that time, 0 AD, the Bible did not exist. And the Old Testament did not exist for almost another 200 years. Now the Torah existed in its present form, and many of the other books of the Bible, like Isaiah and Daniel, existed as individual books. But there was not one complete codex that was known as the Bible. And at that time, the Book of Enoch was considered to have as much authority as Daniel, Isaiah, and the other Hebrew scriptures. It was widely read. And in fact, it was quoted by Jude in the book of Jude as having scriptural authority. So it was a very profound book. For a number of reasons, the Book of Enoch was not included in the Hebrew canon, known as the Bible or the Old Testament, and it was not included in the Christian Bible, known as the Bible. And it slowly disappeared into history. Though fragments survived, the book was lost to history. It was rediscovered by English explorer James Bruce in 1773 in Abyssinia, which is now Ethiopia. He brought 2 copies back to England. However, they were not translated until the 1820s, and the first translations were largely ignored. But by 1850, the book was disseminated and translated into German and Latin and well known in the United States of America and England. Now the book is interesting to me for several reasons. One, because not much literature has survived from Israel in 0 AD. In fact, in the war against the Romans, every single book in Israel was burned and every single tree in Israel was cut down. And this is what has made biblical research difficult. Now, the Book of Enoch is really a collection of 5 or so different books. Although they're not demarcated as being separate books, they're kind of separate stories within the same book. And each one has its own unique character. Now in the Bible, Enoch is of the 7th generation from Adam. And Noah is the 10th generation. According to the Bible, Enoch is unique because he's one of 3 people that was taken up into heaven and did not die. And those three are Enoch, Elijah, and Jesus. The first part of the book Enoch, it opens with a story from Genesis of the Watchers. And it's interesting that they're called Watchers. The Watchers are the fallen angels. And they come down to earth and they mate with earth women and start a race of giants. And they bring technology and magic and war and medicine and disease to earth and start all sorts of conflict. The Watchers are led by a Semyaza who takes 200 of these fallen angels to earth and starts all sorts of problems. Well, the other angels in heaven, who are named as Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Suriel, and Uriel, and we're all familiar with those names, they see the problems and they start a war on earth and capture all the fallen angels and condemn them to chains in a deep abyss in a forbidden place. Now, the interesting thing about that is that they're bound for 70 generations. And if we take the traditional date of Eden as being around 5000 BC, and we take a generation for being 100 years, then 70 generations would be 7,000 years, and that is right around 2000 AD. And that is when these fallen angels would be released, according to that timetable and that worldview. Curious. In any event, the reason this story is interesting is because it sounds a lot like UFOs and aliens. It sounds like a document of Earth being visited by UFOs. And many people have pointed to that curious coincidence. Now, in chapter 24, there's a very interesting reference to a special fragrant tree, which smelt like this. Its leaf, its flower, and its bark never withered, and its fruit was beautiful. Its fruit resembled the cluster of the palm. And the fruit of this tree shall be given to the elect. Now, this, I believe, is the scriptural line that the Rastafarians use to consider that marijuana is the sacred fruit or the sacred herb for their practice. And it's referenced from Enoch, which is in the Ethiopian Bible, which is used by the Rastafarians in their practice. And it was interesting to find that. Now, the third section of the book is called the Three Parables, and there's a set of 3 parables. But it's a little confusing because these are not like the short biblical parables that we know in the New Testament, but these are long stories, and it's difficult to tell when one ends and the next one begins. But there are some highlights in this section also. And at the very beginning, he talks about how a cloud then snatched me up, and the wind raised me above the surface of the earth, placing me at the extremity of the heaven. Now, this really sounds like he was flying. And the curious thing is, in the Old Testament, God appears in a cloud to Moses. And in Acts of the Apostles, Jesus is taken up in a cloud up into heaven. And not a few researchers have remarked how similar this cloud would be to a UFO disguised by a cloud. But who knows? Also in this section of the parables, they introduce the concept of the Son of Man. Now, the theology is a little bit different in the Book of Enoch than we tend to think of it in the Bible. And the Lord of Hosts is this mysterious figure that you can't even really see or bear to look at because of the brilliance. And all the activity in the Book of Enoch is carried out by the angels as a group, and they decide among themselves what to do. And the Son of Man is a separate character that is associated with the Ancient of Days or with the Lord of Heaven. And the Son of Man is described like this: This is the Son of Man, to whom righteousness belongs, with whom righteousness has dwelt, and who will reveal all the treasures of that which is concealed. For the Lord of spirits has chosen him. Now, in the time of Jesus, this would be what people popularly thought of as the Son of Man. And when you read the New Testament and Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man, unless you're familiar with this description, it just sounds confusing, because it's a term that we don't use or hear very much and is only used in the Synoptic Gospels in the Bible. But the quality and character of the Son of Man is pretty thoroughly discussed and elucidated in the Book of Enoch. Now, the next portion of Enoch is a long section that describes what will occur in the future tribulations. And they spend a long time documenting things that are going to occur in the future. And these are what the early followers of Jesus used to anticipate all the things they believed were going to come. And in chapter 62, we have just a small example of this, where in those days the kings who possess the earth shall be punished by the angels of his wrath, wheresoever they shall be delivered up, that he may give rest for a short period, and that they may fall down and worship before the Lord of spirits, confessing their sins before him. And it goes on and on and on, and it talks about how in those days nation will rise up against nation, and there'll be a lot of conflict, and there'll be a lot of natural disasters. After that, they have a very curious parable, which when I first read it struck me as humorous, and I didn't really understand it. They have this long story about cows, and these cows do that, and these cows do that, and these cows do that, and it just strikes me as funny that a Bible would have a long story about all these cows. But it turns out that this is allegorical, and it's an allegorical history, dreamlike history of the Jewish people. And then when it's deciphered, you see which famous prophets and actors, characters that these different cows refer to. But that they would use cows to symbolize the history of the Jewish people is just kind of interesting to me. And at one point, here's a unique phrase that I'm not sure how it fits in. And this is in chapter 87. Then I looked at that one of the 4 white men who came forth first. He seized the first star which fell down from heaven, and binding it hand and foot, he cast it into a valley narrow, deep, stupendous, and gloomy. Now again, that vaguely sounds like UFO lore. And there's a lot of kind of UFO references that could be interpreted through here, but it's difficult to say because it's largely symbolic. Now again, in chapter 92, he references this plant of righteousness. And Enoch said, concerning the children of righteousness, concerning the elect of the world, and concerning the plant of righteousness and integrity. Concerning these things I will speak, and these things I will explain to you. Again, I think that's a line that the Rastafarians use. It's difficult for me to know. And the last section of the Book of Enoch is a revelation of apocalypse. And it must be the model that the revelation of St. John was based on. However, there's a few differences, and the differences are significant. First, the revelation of St. John is much more elaborate and colorful. But the revelation in Enoch is different because it deals with a whole group of people, whereas in the revelation of St. John, it's just one person. And the second thing is, in the revelation of Enoch, they tell you specifically what these people did to get punished. And they have a list of the different things. Whereas in the revelation of St. John, I've never really been able to find out what exactly people were judged on. They describe the judgment and they say there's a judging, but they don't provide the details of what the actual crimes were, so to say, or the sins were. There's one section I found particularly interesting, and this is in chapter 82. And for some reason, it reminds me of someone who actually witnessed turbulent times on earth. Since the tsunami in Indonesia in 2005, when 300,000 people died, I've been aware of how much the surface of the earth can change and how cataclysmic these changes can be. And here's a description from Enoch that is kind of terrifying. I was lying down in the house of my grandfather Malalo when I saw in a vision heaven purifying and snatched away. And falling to the earth, I saw likewise the earth absorbed by a great abyss, and mountains suspended over mountains. Hills were sinking upon hills. Lofty trees were gliding off from their trunks in the act of being projected and of sinking into the abyss. In conclusion, the book ends with the inscription, "Here ends the vision of Enoch the prophet. May the benediction of his prayer and the gift of his appointed period be with his beloved. Amen." If you're interested in history, if you're interested in the history of Christian theology and the history of the Christian church, then you will want to read the Book of Enoch. I highly recommend it. Thank you, and leave your comments below.